Good morning and welcome to day number 2 of Microsoft Envision. I'm Doug Hope. I'm Vice President Content for Emerald Expositions. Welcome. So, we have a big agenda this morning that we're going to absolutely rip right through. It's going to move very fast. I don't want you to be afraid of missing anything, though, because all the information you see here is going to be available to you through Envision. So we are really going to do all of these things. We're going to talk about retail and CPG, size and scale, trends and current state, the realizations, the opportunities, the hurdles, and then we're going to get to the panel after just a few short minutes. So before we get into data and all of the exciting facts about the marketplace, I want to admit to you that I have a real bias. My bias is for a retail point of view of shopper-facing experiences. And so why do I have that bias? Well, I have it because it's my job. About 30 years ago, I was part of a 2-person team that started a magazine called Design Retail, which is today the leading authority on in-store shopper experience, design, and technologies. And retailers spend some $62 billion per year on these products and services that face the shopper, either technologies or flooring and lighting and fixtures and signage and graphics and seasonal print, trim and props and decoratives, all these things that you see in the store that are not for sale. And then 5 years later, 25 years ago, we launched a trade show called Global Shop, which became and is still today one of the top 100 trade shows in the United States. There's 22,000 trade shows, so it's a pretty big one. And this is all the products that we used to have just in our magazine. And we like to call this trade show a shopping spree for the retail designer's imagination. So here's 30 seconds of what that event looks like. So if that looks like an experience that you would like to have, the bad news is we staged it 2 weeks ago. The good news is next March in Las Vegas, we're going to do it again, so you'll have your chance. All right, so now on to the big picture of retail. Retail is a big industry. And just how big is it? Well, for the first time in 2015, retail hit the benchmark of $5 trillion. To put that in scale, U.S. residential home sales of new and existing homes last year was $2 trillion. United States government budget last year was $4 trillion. So the numbers that you see here are actually tracked by the government and updated every 30 days. And one of the reasons they track it so closely is retail is bigger than the government. It's the biggest industry of all. And by the way, very healthy. In the past 15 years, since 2000, that number has grown by 72%, as you see here. There are currently almost 3.8 million storefronts in the United States, and about 90% of those, for those of you who think we live in a retail chain world, this might be surprising, but 90% of those doors are owned by independent retailers. I should note that it's only 25% of the revenues, but we're going to talk about why that scale matters. There is a lot of retail space in the United States. We are the leading builders of retail space. There is currently 14 billion square feet of retail space. To put it into another reference, for every man, woman, and child in the United States of America, there is a 46.6 square foot store with their name on it. And that number has grown dramatically, 142% in 15 years. Since we started the trade show I mentioned to you, there was 19 square feet. So there's been explosive growth in the marketplace. And if you read the headlines, if you fall for the clickbait or read the newspaper, this last statistic is probably the most surprising of all, and that is that 93% of retail sales are in the brick and mortar space. And why is that? Well, if you look, why is it you'd be surprised by it? If you look at the headlines, there's 99% of the headlines are dedicated to e-commerce, when in fact e-commerce is only about 7.5% of the total retail volume in the US. And it's not growing anywhere near as fast as brick and mortar retail. In fact, in 2 years' time, in 2018, e-commerce will grow only by about $50 billion, and it will equal 8% of the total market. Perhaps that explains why so many former pure-play internet e-commerce retailers are now building physical stores with hundreds of locations in the past year and hundreds more coming online in the year ahead. It's not just because they're only getting a 7% play of the revenue, but also because they need to create experience, which is one of the underlying themes that we're going to talk about here today in the panel. So, it is no secret, though, that the brick and mortar world, all retail, is in disruption. We know that in the next 4 years, we're going to see more change in the retail channel than we've seen in the past 50. So it's really changed the outlook and the mindset of the retail industry. Here's a few things that are on the minds. One of them, an evolved focus on the priority on path to purchase. There has been a focus on all the things leading up to the in-store experience, and now the focus is on the in-store experience itself, and rightly so. That's where the decisions are made. There's an entirely different mindset now about the notion of showrooming and its sister webrooming. Both the shopper and the retailer feel much differently about it. The smartphone is not the foe of the retailer, it's the friend, or at the worst, a frenemy. There's this realization of the long-term dominance of brick and mortar dollars. There's an apparel segment that's absolutely being devastated. The leaders in the industry, former leaders like Gap and Abercrombie & Fitch and J. Crew, are being completely disrupted by fast fashion companies like H&M, Uniqlo, Zara, and now Primark invading and actually exploding in growth faster than any of those former leaders were. Generationally, boomers are giving way to millennials. In fact, they just did, and we're going to talk about that at some length. And then the sudden onslaught of devices. And this has really caught this gigantic industry by surprise. To put it in contrast, retailers had 50 years of taking the embossed credit cards and either stamping on top of those embossments or sliding across the embossments to get the credit card number. 50 years of it before they had to adapt to the new technology of the magnetic stripe. And now, today, in a few short years, we've had to deal with, as an industry, the onslaught of devices, a powerful computer in the hands of virtually every shopper. And then with technologies like near-field communication and wireless transaction, really just months by comparison. This is a giant industry of 3.8 million storefronts. They can't adapt in a matter of months. So it takes some time, and that's one of the things that we'll see happen over the next 4 years. The bottom line is that the changes in the retail industry are being driven by two things: technology and the demographics that are driving all the changes in the marketplace. So here's the realizations that are in the market today, those of us who serve the retail industry and those of you who are in the retail industry. The realization that there needs to be the creation of a new and different retail experience, the engagement of a new and different shopper, the structure inside the organization to support those new and different needs, importantly, a different kind of thinking inside the organization. And then, if we're really going to serve the entire retail industry, we need to think about bidirectional scale. What does that mean? We're going to talk about that in the panel. So, in those two areas of technologies and demographics, there's one that's a given. Technology is all about leveraging big data and little devices. And it's just a necessity that these things happen. It's on-demand, available, scalable, continuous. And how it adapts to your particular business is really the areas that we need to explore. I mentioned millennials a little bit earlier. if you're a baby boomer, in 2015, you became a minority. And the interesting thing is that the retail industry just woke up to this. We call it the Great Awakening to the millennial generation. Millennials are now number one. And millennials are out, for the most part, some of them are still in school, but for the most part, they're out of school, in the workforce, and disposing of their income, and they dispose of it entirely differently than the generations ahead, especially differently than mom and dad. So we're grappling with the market and then millennials. So you would think that this $5 trillion industry would be looking at this generation, and they have, and you would think that they would be ready for them. Not so much. So Whole Foods last year realized that they don't get the youth shopper, so they better do something about it, because if they don't, they're not going to survive. Youth shoppers don't go where mom and dad did, because mom and dad spent all their money in Whole Foods on whole paychecks instead of on the kids, and they're not going to do that. So Whole Foods invented 365, which is a smaller footprint of a storefront, and located for the most part in urban areas where the millennials tend to congregate. And it's a value-priced food store. They're not alone. Macy's is the largest department store chain in the world. The biggest Macy's department store chain in Macy's is in Herald Square in New York. They leveled an entire floor just for millennials. It's in the basement, yes, where all the millennials are, but the area is called One Below, and Macy's knows that millennials are much more about the experience than about stuff. And the way to sell them stuff is to create great experiences. And so what you see here is a large area that's dedicated to browse, called the Brow Bar. So you experience everything there is to know about brows and have fun with your brows, and then you end up buying stuff for your eyebrows. But I think if you really want to see a great example that tells you the story about millennials and about change, you have to look outside of retail for a moment at a new development from Hilton called True. Anyone heard of True? TRU. So are there any yet? No, just like there's no 365s. Are they under development? Yes, there's 160 of them right now being built. Here's what True is. An oversized lobby broken into 3 areas for eat, work, and fitness. And then rooms that are decidedly small, 234 square feet, with the largest bathroom vanity of anything in its class. And oh, by the way, $80 a night. Millennials are cheap, frugal, if you will. The analysts that study the hospitality industry are projecting that in 5 years' time, True will be the biggest Hilton chain of all 15 in the organization. Bigger than Hilton, bigger than DoubleTree, bigger than Hampton Inn, bigger than Embassy Suites. 50 million millennials can make that happen. So, if it's all about millennials and technology, what happens when we put them together into retail? We get selfies. More than that, what we get is engagement, not just for millennials, but also for all generations. Technology is really at the heart of changing the retail experience, and if experience matters to millennials and we deliver a great experience, then it is one that not just millennials, but everybody has. So that's a realization. But the realization without the mindset is not going to deliver us where we need to go. So in order to gain the proper mindset, we're in America, where else would we go but Hollywood for the answers? If you've seen The Matrix, you know that Keanu Reeves is the character Neo. And in one scene, my favorite scene, he's charged with the task of bending a spoon. Try as he may, he couldn't do it. Until he got the sage advice that there is no spoon. Neo realized he was in a digital world, therefore the spoon was digital, therefore I can bend the spoon, and sure enough, when he realized that, he did. So moving a little bit closer to home, and literally close to home, let's watch television for a minute with HBO. 2 years ago, it's a cable television service delivered to your living room. And as they point out, in their own advertising now, it's HBO Anywhere, HBO Anytime. There's HBO Go, HBO Now, HBO On Demand. You can watch it on your laptop. You can watch it on an airplane if you want to. You can watch it on your phone. And it wasn't until HBO thought differently about their business model, until they needed to transform that business model. It wasn't until they realized that there is no sofa. And so in order for us to get into the right frame of mind in the retail context, we need to take those elements and put them together. And we'll get to where the promised land is if we realize that there is no spoon, there is no sofa, and yes, in fact, there is no store. And why do we say that? Well, the fact of the matter is that the shopper is always in the store. In the right state of mind, we're thinking about the shopper always being in your store. The shopper expects to be able to move seamlessly in and out of the physical and digital worlds, and they can't frankly understand why they can't do it now. Now, we know it's hard, but in order to get there, we need to do one more thing, which is to break down the silos between the e-commerce side of the business and the digital, the e-commerce side and the physical side, and blend them together. Create a chief experience officer or someone who thinks that way in order to create those seamless integrations between physical and digital worlds. That's the challenge and that's the charge. And that's all we ask you to do. Break down the silos. Create the new kind of experience. Lead the change and transform the business. And with that, I thank you. And I'd like to introduce our panel. Thank you. First of all, Nadia Shurabura is the CEO of Hointer. Nadia?
Good morning, everybody. I'm going to ask you two questions. How many of you love shopping in a physical store? Can you raise your hands? And how many of you love shopping on Amazon.com? Very cool. Now, imagine the store of the future, the physical store of the future. Close your eyes. Imagine you're shopping for an apparel, for a new outfit. You come into the store. Instead of piles and piles and piles of items surrounding you, which you need to dig through and lug to your fitting room, you're coming to a museum and a garden of mannequins. And you walk down the garden of mannequins and you look at items you care for and you point at the items you like. As you point them, those items magically whoosh into your fitting room, getting ready for you to try on. You walk, you enjoy, you relax, you point, you come into the fitting room, everything is neatly there, and you start trying on. You put it on, you don't like the fit, you want a larger size, you point at it again, and the larger size magically whoosh in. You continue trying items on, and then more items start to come in, the ones you didn't ask for, but the ones which might be the perfect fit for you. And you keep on trying. You want help, you click a button, and a stylist is there with you to tell you if your butt looks right in this pair of jeans. So that is the experience, and that is a future store. What if I told you that this store is going to open in 2 months in Seattle in the largest department store in the world? Hypothetically. Thank you.
Nadia, I know that already exists in a company called Hointer, where you go into the store and there's one of every item, you point your phone at it, and it really does. You cannot beat that merchandise into the fitting room. It's a fun race, but you're always going to lose because Nadia gets it to you faster. So to start off with, Nadia is a world-renowned mathematician. And Jeff Bezos hired you to work at Amazon with, as I understand it, no specific task. And tell us about that first year.
Oh, God. So I love retail, as you can see. I love retail. I was born in Russia, in Soviet Russia. No retail whatsoever. You come into the store, you walk in, you stand in line, they bring you something, you grab it. Good for supply chain, not so good for customers. So after I left Russia and I came and I saw the first store, which was in Hungary, I just couldn't believe it was real. So I totally fell in love. So years ago but my background is in mathematics. I was born in Soviet Russia. It was either that or ballet dancing, and ballet did not pan out. So when I came to the United States many years ago and I met Jeff Bezos, he had this, it wasn't the big vision, which it is today, but he had a vision. And so I followed him to Seattle, and with my background in mathematics, I wasn't exactly sure how am I going to fit in. And for the first year, I didn't fit in. I didn't know what to do. I couldn't apply myself, and I couldn't figure out what am I going to work on. And a year went by, and Jeff would pass me in a corridor, and he would say, "How is it going?" And I would say, "Well, not too good." "What are you working on?" "Well, nothing." So I thought he's going to fire me. And then I went, we were really busy that Christmas. So I went and I started to work in customer call center. And I thought that I'm going to talk to customers and help them find the right items and select items. I was really, really excited about it. But the first call came in, and the person asked me, "Where is my stuff?" And I said, "I don't know." And I asked people around, and they said, "Yeah, we don't know, but there are better ways to say I don't know." So for the months, for 30 days, I was answering the phone, and I was saying, "I don't know," and boy, do I know many polite ways to tell it to you. I don't know. And then there was a second question, and that was, "When are you going to be in stock? When is it coming? It's not in stock. It's not available. Where is it going to be?" Same, I don't know, in many different ways. So when I came back to Seattle, I just knew that those were the two questions. There was nothing else. And so for the next many years, I spent all my energy on answering those two questions, making sure that we know where every item is, we know where every person is, we know where every truck is, and we're always in stock on everything. And that we have the largest selection, and it's there, and if it's not there, we know exactly down to the day, and later it became down to an hour, where it's going to be.
Thank you, Nadia. So my parents were right. You can use math in real life.
You can use math in retail, and it's a perfect match.
Right. Thank you. All right, for our second panelist, we'd like to bring up Jeff Roster, who is Vice President Retail Strategy for IHL, and I know there's kind of a humble beginning here. Your dad had a retail meat market that you worked in, and somehow you ended up going from there to Mervyn's, and from there to one of the top 50 technology experts in retail. Tell us a little bit about that.
That is true. I worked probably for the worst boss on the planet, my father. He was an amazingly sensitive man. He grew up in the Depression, fought World War II successfully with 20 million of his closest friends, and then decided to get home, get married, and have 7 kids. All of us worked through the business. My dad literally was the toughest boss I ever had to this day. I worked for him getting started, and ended up doing an internship in college, and it was a full-time internship. It was with the city of Chico. First day, 8 o'clock, show up. I'm in the accounting department. Go show up at 8, work the day. Everyone gets up at 10 o'clock, leaves. Now I'm still working. Day 2, 8 o'clock, 10 o'clock, everyone gets up and leaves. About Thursday, I said, "Where's everyone going?" They're saying, "Taking a break." I said, "Break? What's a break? I grew up in retail." "Oh, you get a 15-minute work break every 4 hours." I call my dad. I say, "Hey, Dad, guess what? I just found out about this thing called a break. You owe me about $2,000. And he says, that's great, son. Well, you owe me about 15 grand for rent. And so we decided to call it even. Worst boss on the planet, honest, but I learned more from my dad as an independent retailer, as an analyst, working with the biggest clients on the planet, the biggest retailers on the planet. Everything goes back to my dad. Everything goes back to the classic retailer of a bygone era. When we talk about technology today, when we talk about trying to personalize, when we trying to talk about everything, every time I hear the smartest people on the planet talk about what we're doing in technology, I think they're just trying to make my dad. My dad had it dialed. The problem is my dad's not leverageable. And we in retail need to really figure out how we take that amazing heritage that we've all grown up in. None of us come to retail by accident. We end up here on purpose. And we're just trying to take that amazing heritage we have and figure out how to leverage it across, not just across Lodi or Stockton or Sacramento, but across the world. So fantastic experience starting out and here today.
Okay, thank you. All right, so I'm going to spend a little time putting questions to Nadia and Jeff, and we will be able to take some questions from the audience when we sort of wind down a little bit. But first question I have for Jeff is the notion of BOPIS, B-O-P-I-S, buy online, pick up in store. That seems to be a trend that is growing. Tell us a little bit about that area.
Yeah, so it's fascinating. We're trying to well, first of all, we have this amazing competitor out there in retail called Amazon, and it's great to sit next to somebody that helped build this behemoth that we're all wrestling with. But the idea of what Amazon has done is fundamentally challenged every one of our precepts about how we do business. And so a few years ago, we realized, you know what? We as physical retailers, and I'm a huge fan of the physical store, but we need to be multi-channel. We need to be operating in the physical world and in the digital world. And at some point, we realized we needed to be able to buy online, pick up in the store, because we, as retailers, understand that we're not trying to sell one item. We're trying to do what? We're trying to sell an additional item. So not one, but 2, 4, 5, 6. That's how we make the business. That's why I think some of the pure plays really don't understand all that well, that it's not about selling one item, it's selling an additional one. So the concept of BOPIS is fascinating because it marries the physical and the digital. It brings the consumer in to the store, and as somebody that shops Best Buy quite a bit, my wife hates it when I do that because she knows I am going to absolutely buy 2, 3, 4 additional items. The thing that's magic about, or the thing that's magic as an analyst about BOPIS is the fact that we get to watch this fundamental transformation. And now I say it's cool, and you in the room that are the practitioners are saying, Jeff, it's not cool. It's very, very difficult because we need to break down these silos that you so eloquently talked about. The magic of tying the physical and the digital is the ultimate retail experience in 2016, and that's what it's about, is how do we bring our greatest strength as retailers, that's our physical store, but how do we sweat those assets enough that we can begin to leverage the digital world and bring that together? Game, set, match for retail.
Okay.
Can I very politely disagree?
Sure.
Okay, cool.
Okay, so I'm debating a world-class mathematician. Okay, game on.
Buy online, pick up in store. To me, this concept combines two worst things. Mm-hmm. Buy online. You don't see, you don't touch, you don't feel. Everything looks the same. If you're buying a pair of jeans, they all look the same. You're buying an expensive ring, $1,000 ring looks exactly like a dollar ring. You are in a worst experience. And then schlepping to the store is the worst experience too, out of the physical world. So to me, buy online, pick up in store exists because we are in a transition phase to making digital experience great and making physical experience great. None of them are great today, so there is this really bizarre concept. You do the most inconvenient shopping, and then you schlep to the store to pick it up. I don't think it's going to live.
Well, it is living, and you can't just go from 0 to 60. It's a process. The point I think that's really key to understand is we're in what I call now the era of intentional innovation. So when I started as a retail analyst at Gartner in 2000, my first piece I wrote, very creative. You can tell why he's going to have a great career being a creative analyst. Retail moving from tech-phobic to tech-centric. Okay, stupid, I know. But the point was, back then, none of us in this industry were at any Gartner conferences. We weren't doing any of the keynotes at Gartner Symposium. Why? Because we weren't viewed as a technologically sophisticated industry. Now, I always argued that. I actually said, Walmart is a good example, Target, a bunch of them are really sophisticated technologically, but we don't talk about it. And so all my horizontal colleagues, some of the best and the brightest people on the planet, were going to financial services. I got so sick and tired of hearing about financial services, and they were doing the most basic things, and they were getting the big keynotes and all that stuff because we in this industry didn't want to ever talk about it because everything's strategically significant. We can't share anything. I couldn't bring my MBA class to my distribution center at Mervyn's because somehow we laid out conveyor belts so much more sophisticated than anybody else that I couldn't let a bunch of engineers look at my distribution center. Nonsense. But you cannot go to a magical world where everything happens. It needs to be a process. We need to learn. We need to innovate. We need to stay in business today because there's a guy up in Seattle that wants to eat everyone's lunch. And so I agree it's maybe not the best, but it's a process. We need to fight the retail wars today. We need to win them today. We need to use the technology that's available today while we innovate for tomorrow. It's reality.
See, to me, the reason buy online, pick up in store exists is because it's very hard to find a product in a store. It's easier to find a product online. That's why people search online and then they go to the store. If it would be phenomenally easy to find a product in a physical store, and we have to do that, then that's customer. Why would customer pre-shop online? Anyway.
So they asked me to moderate, not referee. But
Sorry.
Fair point, I think, on both sides. And Nadia, you just mentioned they look at home or wherever online and then go into the store to actually buy it. And that is what's called web rooming. And web rooming, turns out, is much bigger than showrooming, which is the opposite, going in the store, trying to price compare, which turned out, according to the latest research, that it is not the trend that everyone thought it was, which is why the better attitudes on both the shopper and the retailer behalf. All right, so I have a two-part question. First
I
part.
get the easy one, right?
Yeah. First part is for you, Jeff, and then the second part for you, Nadia. And I think this may be the one thing that resonates the most with everyone, but it'll take a little bit of time to evolve the story. So, last year, in a single day, there was an announcement of an organization in retail that made it the single largest consumer of technology in one day. Walmart said, we're going to spend $10 billion on technology for Walmart. And the one thing that CEO McMillan said was that he was excited about, he really wanted to spend this $10 billion, was really combining the physical and digital worlds. So the question, Jeff, is does everyone need to spend $10 billion? And do you think this is a trend that we're going to see bleed out through the rest of the retail market?
So that is the great question. Well, first of all, no one's going to spend $10 billion because $10 billion would put you about number 50 or so on the top 100 retail list. So they're literally, just unpack that statement for a second, that number. $10 billion is 2,950,000 retailers don't even have that as total revenue. So we're in a time, as I said, we're in the era of intentional innovation. We are at a conference where we're celebrating technology. I was at a conference last week where we celebrated technology. I'm going to another conference where we're going to celebrate technology. We are in an arms race of technological development like I've never seen before. It's a fantastic place for me to be as an analyst. Not always the best for retailers because you have to wrestle through these decisions. But the key there is to be in the business of fundamentally transforming the approach to retail. Walmart's come out. Walmart, the ultimate physical retailer that's doing what? Becoming very digital. Amazon, the ultimate e-tailer that's doing what? Becoming very physical. You are caught in between two gigantic, it's Mothra versus Godzilla, and unfortunately retail is Tokyo or San Francisco. So what do? The immediate response is we're not spending $10 billion because we only make our total revenue is half a billion. But we need to be looking at creating an innovation ecosystem, working with our partners, whether they're our host today or, some far weaker technology provider. But we need to be in the business of absorbing technology and looking to do things smart. Now, what we've done historically in retail, and IHL did a study where it popped up again that retail is now beginning to ramp up development of their own code. God, don't do that. That's silly. Do not write your own code. In the era of the cloud, where there's enough good functionality, you're not going to differentiate enough to gain the value, and you're going to be into an endless developmental cycle. Work with your partners. Develop a strategy, make sure the CEO, the board of directors, or if you're a one-shop operation, you as the person that's writing the check, are in the business of thinking fundamentally how we use good technology that's off the shelf today to transform our business, because your customers have already transformed. You have any doubt about it, pick up my daughter and two of her friends who are classic millennials and go for a 4-hour drive, and honest to goodness, you will see more technology in their hands than you as a 55-year-old like myself probably have used in a lifetime. Our customers have already transformed. How we transform, the decisions we make today over the next 3 to 4 years will tell us whether we're going to be in business, because Walmart's not slowing down, our friends at Amazon aren't slowing down, and you need to be moving.
Thanks, Jeff. I like the Hollywood analogies. It really is all about Hollywood in the end. So,
can I say something about $10 billion?
Well, I have another question for you onto that. So it really is.
I wanted to talk about $10 billion.
It's a lot of money, right?
Yeah, I can find a use for it.
So
it wouldn't be in technology, though.
It's about scale. The question, and probably does speak to your point.
Yeah.
So, how many in the room have $10 billion to spend on technology? Probably nobody, right? So the big question is, how do you scale bidirectionally? You saw that in the presentation. Well, the answer to the everyman retailer is, I can't do that, so how do I go out in the market? So if you're a world-class mathematician, you can open one store and literally change the world. And I can tell you, Nadia has been on the speaking circuit. There's journalists all across retail who have been writing about the Hoynter experience. And the story that she told about the world's largest department store is true. So here's a one-store operation that had a concept of taking technology and really putting it to work for the shopper. And then all of a sudden, one of the biggest apparel brands in the world and the largest department store chain in the world is using it in, a couple of weeks. So how did you scale up to that?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I started and made a big mistake at the beginning. So when I opened my small Hoynter store, and I went through all the struggle of running it, and then I thought about reinventing it. The first thing I envisioned, this beautiful customer experience, the one I described, and I started to implement it. And I knew robotics, being from Amazon. I knew large, massive investments in a physical world. And so I engineered my store in a very completely over-engineered way. Literally, there were robots whooshing in for you. There were things moving, rotating, and everything else, and it was expensive. And then I started to think about it, and I started to think about scaling it up. And we in physical retail have a huge challenge because we have many stores and a very complicated environment. Kids are playing. They're pulling stuff everywhere. Customers, everything is moving. Associates don't have any technology experience to maintain that stuff. And so when you go to many retail stores, anybody who is trying anything looks beautiful in a flagship store. You go there 2 months later, it's dead, it's black. It doesn't run. And I had the same problem in my store. And so what we did is the following. I took all that expensive stuff out and I put it in my garage. I was crying when I was doing that. It was very dear to my heart. And I told my guys that you have $100 and empty store, and you have to recreate exactly the same experience where everything moving, everything is whooshing, customers is pointing, all magic is happening, but you have $100. Go do that, because otherwise it will never scale up, nor it will never work beyond my own little store. And so my engineers were cursing for the first several weeks. They thought I'm totally insane, but that's what we did. So to me, to scale up, we in retail have a particular challenge. We have to be very, very, very cheap. And it has to be very, very simple. And it has to be very robust. And it needs to be totally magical. It just needs to work. It needs to be magic. But magic for $100. So that's that.
Sounds more reasonable than 10 billion.
But I'll take 10 billion and go shopping with it.
All right, so you touched on a point that I would like to ask to both of you. The prototype to the rollout. In my world of design, we see prototypes and flagship stores repeat this pretty much the same process. We see a new concept rollout and then roll out into a flagship, but we don't ever see it actually execute and roll out to the chain. And in our experience anyway, the prototypes and flagships are developed by a consultancy, design firm, if you will, and then a lot of technologists. And the engagement of the people who actually design, plan, and merchandise the store are never actually part of that process. And so 90% of all of the flagships don't actually happen. And most of the time, we attribute it to the fact that those other people weren't brought into the process, and that particularly content seems to be the hitch in the process. So the people who are responsible for physical content, the people who print signs or what have you, are the people who are going to have to do the digital content, if that's the way that it's going to go. And digital is a lot more complicated. It needs a constant attention. And yet, if you don't plan for that ahead of time, then it is doomed to fail. And so I'm curious about your take on that, Jeff and Nadia.
That's a hard question.
Yeah, that's what I thought. Well, here's the point. I mean, I learned the best lesson, so I have an MBA, I have an undergrad degree. The best lesson I ever learned about retail was in a distribution center in Fremont, California, as a very young guy installing a new system. And we came in and we said, hey, this is great. We're going to be more efficient. And basically, my team looked at me and said, yeah, you're going to cost me my job. Why do I want to make you more efficient? And I thought, well, because that's the right thing to do for the business. But then I learned a really good lesson. That wasn't necessarily maybe the right thing for each one of those guys. And so when we try to do the process of re-engineering, of creation, of innovation, I'm not saying we need to go make work, but we need to be taking a lot of partners, starting with the board of directors if you're a public company, certainly the CEO, and you have to have a balanced team, and you have to understand in a time of transformation, most likely somebody's going to lose some power politically, and so we need to be working with that. We need to be smart about that. You can't be the wonderkin coming in pushing something, because the people that have to execute it will make it very unsuccessful. And so part of the era of intentional innovation is figuring out how we actually do that, and how we empower our teams, and how we make sure it's okay to fail. You cannot fundamentally transform your business if you can't fail. Now, I'm not, I'd probably get fired if I went and said, yeah, let's fail and spend tons of money. No, we need to fail quick, we need to fail fast, but we need to experiment. And those kinds of fundamental transformations, or those kinds of prototypes, need to have partners, need to have teams, and need to be infused in the organization. And the organization needs to be about that business. That's, I think, the hardest thing we have in retail right now. When I look at it, when I talk to you guys, when we're in the private relationships, I know it. I get it. I used to be a retailer. I understand how difficult it is. I understand how we're trying to, build a 747 while we're doing 550 miles an hour screaming to New Orleans. It's a tough job, and it's a complex job, but it's one we got to get right. We need to transform. I'm more worried about transforming our organizations than I am deploying new technology. Because if our organizations aren't ready to absorb the amount of technology you need to absorb in the next 3 to 5 years, it doesn't matter what you get. I mean, Nadia's got a great example. Technology for technology's sake does 0.00. An infused, empowered organization where people can experiment and can risk and not lose, that's what we need.
So Nadia, you with your one store, with the really cool experience of being able to go into the store, tap on to whatever apparel item, race to the dressing room, had already made news. The world was paying attention to it, and yet there was a designer who happened to go to your store, pretty famous designer, and he didn't like the experience at all, right?
Yeah.
So tell us about that and what you did about it.
Yeah. So I opened my store, and there is this magic experience, and I'm so proud of it. And jeans are whooshing in, and customers are trying on. And then one night, I am sitting in my store in Seattle, and I see a gentleman coming into my store, and he's really, really well-dressed. And in Seattle, if you have a well-dressed person, you know something big is happening. You can see that person from far, far, far away. So I looked very carefully, and I recognized him. And he was a very famous designer. And I was very scared, and I was very excited. And he shopped for a long time. He shopped for over 2 hours. He tried everything. And jeans were whooshing into him very, very quickly. He tried 50 items. He was going through that experience. And then he came back to the store where I was sitting, and he introduced himself. He didn't need to do that. And he said, I didn't feel anything. I didn't have an emotional connection. And I'm a scientist. I'm a mathematician. So to me, the words emotional connection meant nothing. And I'm from Amazon. You had what problem? Emotional connection? Aha. So, and we started to talk, and I did tell him that I didn't get him. So he brought me to Europe, and I spent a lot of time with him. And he was showing me his design process and his team and the mood boards. And he was trying to put me in a mood. And I wasn't getting it at all. Mood board? Seriously, you need a mood board for something? And he would tell me something, and I didn't understand it. And I would tell him something, and he wouldn't understand me. So, and then he said, look, we're not connecting, so why won't you try to find one thing in your life where you actually feel emotional connection to something? And I started to think, what in my life do I feel emotionally connected to or emotional connection with? And we have no children here, no children. The only thing which came to mind is making love. I can connect. I am emotionally connected. I'm paying attention. I'm feeling it. I'm not distracting. I'm in it. I got that. And then he said, try to extrapolate it to shopping. So now, anytime he would tell me something, he'd say shopping, I think making love. And I started to understand him. He would say, wouldn't it be wonderful if customers come in and they would shop in our store enjoying for 30 minutes? Yep, sounds really good. What about 2 hours? So, wow, yeah. Longer than that, probably not. Sounds really good. So I started to understand him. And then it helped me tremendously because to make physical stores a thing of the future, it needs to be a great technical and operational experience. So you're not distracted with little things. But it also needs to be a beautiful emotional connection you feel. And if we get those two things right, that is the store of the future. So what I started to do after that in my store is try to hide technology. So you come in and you don't see it. Your focus is on a product. Your focus is on how you look in a mirror. But you don't know that there is a technology. Technology is just something which makes you not wait for things, or which makes you not dig through things, or which makes you not search for your item, for your size. Because if you're making love and you get distracted every few minutes, it's not going to be fun. So. Yes, and there were several things mathematically why they increased. The biggest contributor was what I saw is that the more items you try, the more you buy. So when my customers would commit in the store before, they would try 2 things or 3 things, and they were out of there. Particular men. Men, attention deficit disorder. Come in, grab, try on, go to the fitting room once, and he is done. Maybe he will scream for help, ask me to bring another size. And in the past, I would open the door, bring him another size. He's naked. I'm looking at him. We're uncomfortable. He will never ask me again. He would be done. So what I saw is that if we can magically increase the number of items customer is experiencing when she or he comes to the store, the sales go up. And so with my department store, we started with just a few items. We got to 12. Now our goal is to go to 30. So every customer on average who is going to come into the department store is going to try on 30 items. And for a man, my goal is 50 because, boy, do they need help. That's it. Particularly Microsoft, guys. Lots of help.
I'm done. I'm done. I surrender. Oh, yeah.
Well, I think you, I think you got our attention, and made the point about Seattle. You know, Microsoft is in Seattle, right? About apparel in Seattle. So I think, you know, there's a clue there about experience and what experience means. And if the greatest generation in terms of numbers, 50 million of them, are all about experience. The great question is, for you, what does experience mean? So with that, I think maybe we ask you to come up to the microphones. We have more questions, certainly, if you don't, but we want to know what questions that you have. There's microphones here on the stairway, so we would welcome any and all of you to come up and ask what is on your mind.